Close reading is a very old process. It's been around for a really long time. It's become more popular in the last decade again. Close reading is a process where you inspect a text and you go back to that text a few times to figure out what it's saying. It's not where the teacher tells you what the text says, or it's not a easy to read text where the meaning is obvious. So the process of close reading is usually students are annotating, they're underlining, they're circling, they're writing margin notes. They're reading it a second time. They're talking with their peers because there's big questions we're trying to go on. We tend to think of a journey of close reading starting at the literal level, like what are the right there things in this text? We move to the structural level. How is that text working? What are those moves that author made? Why this word versus that word? Why this text structure? Why this literary device? And then eventually we move to the inferential level. What is this text meaning? So for the student side, we say this: what does the text say? How does the text work? What does the text mean? It's a journey we go on in complex pieces of text. You said science teacher, so I'm having a very recent classroom observation. The students were reading an excerpt of Darwin on natural selection. Super complicated piece of text for us. And the teacher doesn't give it up. The kids have to go back based questions. What is he saying about this? More structurally, how's he arguing? Why is he using we all the time? Why did Darwin in that section say, we know, we know? It was really interesting watching the students unpack this piece of text that is very old and that has been challenged. And then at the end, they got to read two counter arguments to natural selection. It was so fascinating to watch students grapple with it, rather than have a teacher say, okay, here's what this one says, here's what this one says, done.
So you mentioned you did this in a recent observation. You saw this in a recent observation, which means there must be a place for this strategy of close reading in a setting that's not in a classroom. So I guess help us envision a little bit more crisply, what does that look like to facilitate that type of discussion in an environment that is not face-to-face?
Awesome. So the key is rereading and asking questions that students talk about. They interact with their peers. So I've seen it done a couple of ways. This teacher used breakout rooms. So they would have a couple of questions, move to a breakout room, and literally like 3 or 4 minutes back into the whole room, back to a breakout room. I've seen other teachers take a fishbowl approach, where they identify specific students to join the fishbowl. The rest of the students in the class are using the chat function and the reaction buttons. So I've seen it a bunch of different ways. Ideally, in my mind, students have the text in print because these are complex pieces of text. And despite the rhetoric around this, the research is pretty clear. When the text is complex, the brain prefers paper. And so we do provide some readings to students where they're going to actually write on them and reread them and talk about them, even in the pandemic. So ideally, for close reading, they have a print version, although we do see some lessons that are electronic and they're working. So they're in those texts, they're rereading them, they're talking with partners, and the teacher is taking them on that journey from some very literal questions to more inferential, to more of meaning making. What does it mean there?
This, again, reveals my lack of personal experience with this technique, but you mentioned the physical text. Are there kind of skills for how to market text that teachers should be learning and then teaching their students? Because it feels like there's something more than just knowing how to ask the rich questions about the text.
Yeah. So in general, I would say there are 3 foundational annotation marks that students should know how to do. And if you do it across classes or across grade levels, it actually develops as a habit over time. So we generally would say, have students underline things that are important. And if they underline it, they should consider paraphrasing or quoting from that because they said it was important. Circle words or phrases that are confusing or unclear. It forces your brain to monitor, am I understanding this? And then third, write margin notes where you summarize and synthesize. So you're keeping track in your own words, summarizing and synthesizing. After those 3, let students mark the text in ways that work for them. Do they want to write a question in the margin? Great. Do they want to put an exclamation in the margin? Great. There's other things they can do in the world of annotation, but if they have those 3 habits, their minds will engage with the text. What's important? So that's central ideas, if you will. What am I not understanding? Monitoring, and then summarizing and synthesizing.